The Future Sport Podcast is brought to you by 3Advance, developers of sports tech apps that are AI-powered and UX-focused. So if you're looking to create some apps for your startup or your sports biz calls for some artificial or business intelligence, you should check out 3Advance. They're incredible. Go to 3advance.com. That's the number 3advance.com.
Empire.
It's not just having the data, it's how you translate it.
Oh, the numbers can be presented to you, but ultimately, I think the strongest athletes are the ones that use that data to almost lie to themselves. That's not the right, but to use the data to tell the story that they want that's going to give them the most confidence. I think that's, I was thinking about it this morning, and I think that's what I did.
That's former Olympian and world champion freestyle skier Kearney, who knows training involves not just new analytics, but personalizing the message. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. Kearney and Dr. Markus Deutsch from Fusion Sport are part of the Human Performance Summit in Park City, Utah, here in October. And both have unique perspectives into what makes a champion these days. But we're going to start with the opening of the baseball postseason, which begins tomorrow, as of the time of this taping. Analytics and team building, they've put Houston on the innovation map in recent seasons. And in future ones, the future is now with the introduction of a lot of new tech. All this data collection is changing the games, and we'd like to believe, for the most part, positively. But there are clearly issues that need to be resolved before you're going to get everyone on board in a tech revolution. Wearables, in theory, help everyone understand their bodies better and thus help guide improvement in performance and recovery. But they can also provide some information that athletes with high-leveraged contracts may not want to share. Britt Ghiroli from The Athletic joins us now. Hi, Britt. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Let's start with what specific data collection devices are the players most concerned about?
Sure. Well, I think, obviously we've become a data-driven society, not just in sports. I wear a Fitbit. I know everyone's, got everything monitored, in terms of the watches and things like that. But I think that mostly with the players, it comes down to rights. I think they don't want teams having access to data that may hurt them down the road, whether that's potential injuries, whether that's something that could impact their performance. It could be used against them in arbitration. I think that's really the concern of the players when you look at data moving forward.
Where do HIPAA laws fall into all of this discussion?
Certainly they're a part of this discussion, but I think if you're a team and you're looking for ways around it, as I was told by people that work in baseball, there's easy ways to create a different database, and as long as it's not a medical database, you can title it performance or really whatever you want, and that's where you can kind of dump all that data in. So certainly there's HIPAA laws, and certainly those are easy to comply with, but there's also easy workarounds when we're talking about data.
How about the union? What's their position on all of this stuff at this point?
Well, they're alarmed by it. Tony Clark told me this spring, and he's reiterated that position several times, that the data, the players' data, is their own personal data. And when they negotiated the last CBA, this was very early on in terms of wearable tech, and there's a little bit of stuff in there that basically says it's the player's right. But like I mentioned with the workaround, they can have these guys wear them in the minor leagues. No one's going to say no. The minor leaguers aren't covered by the Major League CBA, so it's a really easy way to get data on everyone in your organization. And, Tony Clark, who has a son, is even more troubled with the fact that, MLB has a lot of deals with little leagues and youth tournaments. And, parents kind of look at these waivers and just sign away their lives. And a lot of times that includes data, that includes wearing vests. The amount of data available, not just at the big league level, but that trickles down is is something that each parent really needs to be cognizant of, no matter what level your child is playing at.
Obviously, we can list all the reasons why the teams would want it, and for good reasons and ones that would help them inform decisions that maybe the players don't want them to be informed about. As for the league, though, they want this stuff for a lot of other reasons too, right? They want to be able to track things, augmented reality, maybe gambling, right? All of that comes into play here?
Oh, certainly. I think there's a lot of stuff that comes into play that doesn't necessarily hit you at first, but certainly, I mean, what would the next Bryce Harper or Manny Machado as a 12-year-old, what would, MLB like to do with their data? Are they using it to kind of find the next superstars? Are they using it, as you said, with the gambling? So certainly there's a lot of avenues you can take with this. And listen, this isn't the end here. I mean, we're just kind of at the tip of the iceberg in terms of data. So it'll be fascinating to see what ends up happening in terms of control and usage in the next CBA.
That's where I wanted to leave this with. Where do you see this going over the next 1 to 3 years? Clearly, they're in a tug of war about it. It's not going to stop. It's going to continue to progress. Where do they find some common ground on all of this?
The players, from the guys that we've talked to, they really kind of see it as a personal thing. I mean, guys are okay wearing something that monitors their sleep and going to the team if they have questions. But I think, by and large, they want this data to be something that's very personal, that, they don't necessarily feel like their employer, which in this case is the team, should have access to. And you look at it, it's not just MLB. I mean, would you want your employer to have access to, what your sleep habits are like, what your nutrition habits are like, and the ability to kind of dock you or make a case against you depending on what you're doing, not at the stadium, not at the field, not at your job. So I think it's a slippery slope, but I don't see how the players would kind of give up those rights. Certainly it's a very personal thing, and it's something that's going to continue to grow. And as I mentioned, there are workarounds around this. The minor leagues, it seems to be the biggest one in terms of those guys are not going to say no to anything. They don't have any rights. So I don't foresee the teams kind of putting up too big of an issue, because I think there's too many loopholes for them to really complain. But, this data, this TrackMan and StatCast, all that, it's in every stadium now. And I think the wearable tech, the K-vests and things like that, players want to have control over. And I think that's going to continue. The issue is what's next? Where do you draw the line? And what comes next? Because, like I said, we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg with this data. So it's exciting, but it's also, I think, alarming.
Britt Ghiroli, you can see her on MLB Network, and you can read her on the pages of The Athletic. Thank you, Britt.
Yeah, thank you.
Up next, former U.S. Olympic freestyle skier Hannah Kearney on the rapid upgrade in training tech. This is the Future Sport Podcast. Our guest this week is an accomplished freestyle skier from the United States team, Hannah Kearney, who has won 2 Olympic medals, 8 World Championship medals, been part of 46 World Cups, and she'll be part of the Human Performance Summit coming up this month in Utah. Nice to have you here, Hannah.
Thank you for having me.
What do you think the goals are for a summit like this? What do you want people to know about?
Well, I'm talking about data and how it helped me become a better athlete, but also telling stories, warning stories about how data isn't everything, especially to the athlete who is a human being, and emotions drive some of their performances as well. I think the most exciting thing about this summit is having all of these people who care greatly about human performance, whether it be in the military or in sport, together in one room, being able to share stories. I think that's going to be the most valuable part, so I think my part is just a nice distraction from that.
So there's a couple parts to that I'd like to address with you. One is just the literal data of how to get better athletically. We'll keep the mental part of this out of it for a moment, and the emotional part of it. How have you seen that data change the way athletes like yourself have trained through the years?
Well, in my career, it changed immensely, because at the beginning, we barely had a gym. We didn't have a trainer. This is for the U.S. mogul team. We didn't have any testing results. And then slowly throughout my 13-year career on the team, that became more and more significant part of training process. And now the next step, and it was just happening at the end of my career, is the digitization of all this information so it can actually be used more than just anecdotally. One athlete's data is only as good as if you can compare it to other athletes, to themselves over time. It has to be looked at outside of isolation. Being able to store, compare, and record all this data will allow that.
So initially, when you said we don't even have a gym, we don't have these type of facilities to even to have the type of results that we're looking for, at least initially, was that because your discipline wasn't taken seriously enough?
I mean, there was a combination of things. We didn't have as much money. Yes, the sport was newer, and then some of it was my own personal choices and age. So had I been desperate for that information and that sort of support, I probably could have found it and been supported by the ski team. But I was a 16-year-old in high school, 2,000 miles away from where the ski team was headquartered, and so it was just easy to, okay, I'll just play soccer. That's my cross training, which was great until I graduated high school.
So 16-year-olds now, I'm sure you're around them. You see them. They're the future of the sport. Are they different? Do they look at all of this differently?
The fun thing about our sport is that I was, I think, 17 when they allowed backflips. So all of a sudden I went from a kid doing, most people don't know names of tricks, but I was not going off flips. I was going off jumps and doing silly little spread eagles and tricks with my legs. Then at that point, they allowed backflips, and all of a sudden this became a new component of my sport. And I was like, okay, I guess I need to learn how to go upside down. Now, kids getting into the sport know that from the get-go, have much better air awareness, and have been doing flips since they were small, which is far better, far safer. The younger you are when you learn, the better off you are. So that's one of the greatest changes. I think there's more information that it's okay to lift weights at a younger age. That's actually good for your bone density and your bone development. The things that were rumors or frowned upon when I was a kid are not necessarily. However, the counter story to that is that there might be some over-specialization happening at a young age because as sports get more competitive, that tends to happen, and I don't think that's great for anyone, but I do understand why it happens too.
So when you were younger too, and all this data was coming in and it was new and it's being implemented, they had to translate this back to you to figure out how to implement it to make you better. Have you seen an evolution of the translation for the younger athletes so that it can be implemented more efficiently?
That I have been far enough outside of the actual testing realm for about 7 years that I'm not sure. I would imagine there have been strong developments in that. What my experience with that was the data was pretty much just presented as cold, hard data, and it was up to me to interpret it. They explained what it meant, but it was not softened in any way. It was not presented like it was for 16-year-olds. Because at this point in my career, I was a developed athlete, and I spoke numbers. That resonated with me. And that's what I mentioned earlier, that not every athlete is motivated by making their numbers change. I was. And so it worked out well. I think for the athletes that aren't, you have to frame it. And you also have to look at, say, test results or results or their skiing results over time and look at them together sort of more holistically. So why have we been training for 6 months, but you're not getting any stronger? Okay, we need to look at your body fat composition. Are you losing weight? So you're not, why is your performance suffering even though you are stronger? Those types of things. You have to compare the numbers to each other for each individual athlete.
I want to ask you about wearable technology because what you do is so specific. It's so interesting and different. And the degree of difficulty, obviously, is far different than many other sports that athletes take part in. Have you seen a change in how wearable technology can help the freestyle skier?
Well, I think good old-fashioned heart rate monitors are always going to be incredibly helpful. Beyond that, we have used things such as devices that measure the G-forces on your body during turns. It's almost like a GPS. Sorry, not GPS. Well, I think it uses that, but then it also measures the forces of every turn of your landing of your jump. That can be used to predict when injuries will happen, and that's where I'm fascinated by that stuff, but also as a high-level athlete, there's only so much you have time to bother with, and something that's going to tell you when you're going to have an injury is probably not something you're interested in. Sure, you'll let the data be collected, but don't tell me about it, right? Like, it's too late at that point. That's something that pays off generations later if you've been able to collect the data. Again, because I like data, I think there is a role for that in training. I think it allowed me, some wearable technologies, for example, heart rate monitors, allowed me to push myself harder than I ever would have, because I was like, I feel terrible. If I was just listening to my body, I would quit. However, I had my heart rate monitor. I had the test results from lactate threshold tests I had done with the ski team, and I knew that I was okay to keep my heart rate at that level for 10 minutes, even though it felt terrible. And so I pushed through. So that sort of thing, that's where I found data and test results actually quite motivating. But that did not work for everyone.
I like talking to the high-level athletes, too, especially in yours where instincts really matter here, I would think, in the moment. Yeah. The instincts really need to take over, and all this data is giving you all this information. And I would think that the last thing you want anything to do is you're second-guessing anything in that moment. So what about good old-fashioned instincts? Where does that play a role in a championship-level athlete in a discipline like yours?
Oh, it's huge. The numbers can be presented to you, but ultimately, I think the strongest athletes are the ones that use that data to almost lie to themselves. That's not the right. But use the data to tell the story that they want. That's going to give them the most confidence. I think that's. I was thinking about it this morning, and I think that's what I did, because it wasn't just the numbers that gave me confidence. They did. It was like, okay, I did 1,400 squats since last season. Okay, great. Who cares? So I would use that number and be like, I bet no one else did that number. Or I would say, if no one else knows they did that number, that makes me a better athlete. I deserve to win, or I deserve to perform well because I prepared properly, that sort of thing. So I think I use data as, instead of a sports psychologist, I use data. And I was my own sports psychologist using the data. So I had to put in the work, of course. It wasn't all just crazy talk. But I did use it to help me, and that's where the instinct played a role. So if something didn't sit right, I wouldn't do it, or if some number didn't look right to me, I wouldn't use that number in my story that I was telling myself.
Let me go back to the idea of the emotional wellness, too. That's not something we touch on a lot here, because everything is so focused on the technology, data collection, wearables, whatever it may be to help athletes and teams get better performance. Can you kind of address the emotional wellness part of this and where you think that was when you started as a young athlete and where you think that may be now?
I think it has grown in importance. In turn, I think teams are really individualizing training for athletes, realizing that they're people and not, even on a team, your goal is the same, win the game, but each athlete might respond differently to different motivations. My story about that is that we had an excellent strength and conditioning coach from 2009 to 2013. He kind of really helped change my career, mostly because I trusted him. But he gave us the 4 female mogul skiers right before, the morning before our 2010 Olympic competition. He gave us each a card. And I assumed everyone's card was pretty much the same with a nice note in it from him. But I learned only last year that they were very, very different. And my card, as you can probably guess from the stories I told, was just a list of data. I filled out diary entries every day of my workouts. I lived 2,000 miles away from him. So for the whole post-season or off-season leading into the Olympics, all my training data was compiled in this database, and he put it on this card. And all he said was, like, you're ready, ski well, something like that. And I was like, yes, that is a very inspiring card. What I learned later was the other cards were much more emotional. It was, like, about feelings and believing in the person. That wouldn't have worked for me. That would not have been inspirational or motivating. But for my other teammates, they didn't care about the data, or maybe didn't even have it. I don't know, but he did not add that to their card. And that's why he was a good trainer, because they knew that people have different emotional needs.
And you are now a personal trainer, and you are working with a lot of youth sports as part of the Youth Sports Alliance in Park City. What are you finding out about young athletes now? What are you learning about them?
Oh, I have lots of lessons. A, parents are delusional. B, the general level of athleticism is a little scary, and I'm thrilled to be a part of young athletes' careers just to help them with fundamental foundational movements, because that, I think, in the long run prevents injuries. But what's great about our programming is it's not specific to a sport. It really is designed for that, to help athletes just become better rounded. And I think that's like one of the best techniques to take to training. I do use some testing, and we, at the gym, and then also in my private training, use some test results. But based on that story I just told you, I'm careful that to some people it's not particularly motivating. All they look at is like, oh, I'm so weak. That's what they see in a strength test result, not, oh, I have so much room for improvement. So you have to be careful about, again, how you present the data and who you test at what point in time.
Parents being delusional is nothing new, though. I will tell you that.
It's new to me. I just assume people are were grounded in some sort of rational thought process, but that's when it comes to their children, they're not, and I think my parents are guilty of that too.
I mean, for you too, though. I mean, like, this is interesting. I mean, you're working with young kids. The likelihood of any of them being you is very slim, right? That's very slim that someone gets to that particular level. How do you control kind of what the bar should be for what they do for you and under your eye?
I think most people have no idea about my past at all. I'm just Joe Schmo at the gym. I'm just a personal trainer who's certified. So I think that's not completely true. I do work with a few mogul skiers, so in my sport, they're aware that I was good at that sport. But what's fun is, like, I've never even seen these girls ski. I actually don't know what they ski like. My job is solely focused on helping them enjoy the experience in the gym, because if we're honest, the off training, the dry land training, ends up becoming the majority of the time. You can't be on snow every day of the year. You can't be in the gym every day. So you've got to enjoy that part of the training. So trying to expose them to fun elements of training, creative elements, and helping them get stronger, which at their age is really important. Just prevent it. If you have an injury, when you're 16, that really sets you back.
You can learn more from Hannah at the Human Performance Summit this month in Park City, Utah. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure speaking with you, Hannah.
Thank you kindly.
Fusion Sport will be running the Human Performance Summit, and their CEO, Dr. Markus Deutsch, joins us for a preview next. So let's take a minute here to thank our friends at 3Advance. These guys are ranked one of the nation's top app developers, but that's not all. They've helped grow a bunch of sports tech startups like Team Builder, T-Box Tour, and In-Game Fantasy, but they're also experts in user experience, cloud APIs, and artificial intelligence. So if you're looking for a dev partner to bring your future sport tech to life, look these guys up. Go to 3advance.com. They're the team to make it happen, and advance you will. That's the number 3advance.com, and tell them Future Sport sent you. Our guest this week is CEO and co-founder of Fusion Sport and the smart-based platform, Dr. Markus Deutsch. How are you, Markus?
Hey, morning. How you doing?
Great to have you here. You guys are having a human performance panel that is heading to Park City, Utah for the 2019 summit. What's going on? What are you guys doing?
Oh, it's great. So it's an annual event we put on. We're doing one here and one in Australia, and then in March, one in Europe. So basically just pulling together a lot of the leading minds in the human performance area, specifically related to things like sports technology and data, injury prevention, and those sorts of areas, and getting them together. Co-hosted this year with one of our clients, US Ski and Snowboard, over in Park City. And yeah, just getting together for 3 days of really focusing on how we can drive our humans to perform better and get injured and ill less.
Your platform is used by a lot of teams and other organizations as well as the military. What do they get out of using this platform?
I mean, basically our role, we're obviously living in a world now where there's a lot of data. There's data from things like wearables or surveys or blood testing or just all of these different things. At the end of the day, what we do is we pull all that data together, because humans are complex. You can't just look at data in isolation. You need to look at the whole picture. So you really need to get everything in one place, and that saves people a lot of time, but it also allows people like coaches and medical staff to make better decisions, because they just have better information to work with and more insights to work with. So ultimately, it's all about keeping people as ready as possible. So whether that's ready to go to war, or ready to play on a court, or ready to dance on a stage, or even just ready to go to work, and also, keeping people at their best, but also minimising their chances of missing time due to being injured or sick.
Have you seen training methodologies change through the use of all of this? And if so, how have you seen that change?
Yeah, absolutely. We're in a pretty young industry compared to something like medical science. Sports science is actually pretty young. It's only sort of probably about 50, 60 years old. And so there's still a lot of paradigm shifts happening. I guess a good example from a training point of view is, I guess if you go back even 10 years, the tendency on how to train people was sort of a real bang or bust methodology. You would tend to really sort of hammer people and then let them recover. It was sort of almost a really wavy way of training people, of sort of smashing them and letting them bounce back. What's come to light over the last sort of 4 or 5 years is that's actually a really dangerous way to do it, and the key is actually to train really consistently and actually manage those peaks and troughs and smooth them out as much as you possibly can. So there's actually been a kind of a real about face in that. And in other areas too, like nutrition, everyone knows about the sort of the still raging debate between high carb diets and high fat diets and things like that. There's still a lot of paradigm shifts happening in our industry, which is really cool.
Can you kind of navigate where you are with who should have the information that you gather on athletes?
Look, we typically work at the moment in an environment where athletes are working with people like strength coaches, sports scientists, medical staff, athletic trainers, and coaches, obviously, sports psychologists, nutritionists. It's really about the support staff, getting that whole picture and being able to share that information. So, for someone like for a doctor or an athletic trainer, it's really important that they understand the context of an athlete's body from getting information from people like strength coaches or sports scientists, so that they know, what's the context of this injury that's presenting or the risk. So that's the typical model, I guess, and that's pretty much the same in military, performing arts or whatever. We do obviously have to be very careful about who sees what. We abide very closely to things like HIPAA compliance, and so and that's another purpose of our system, is to be able to closely control who can see what about those athletes and make sure that people can only see the appropriate data that they need to see and that they've been trained to properly interpret.
What's your background? How did you get into this?
I've got a PhD in exercise physiology in rugby, believe it or not. So I did that in New Zealand. I'm Aussie, but as you can probably tell, but did that in New Zealand in the late 90s. And I just got into my PhD involved doing a lot of testing and profiling athletes and just generated a lot of data. And at the time, I met the co-founder of the company, a guy called Joe Cole in New Zealand, and he was a similar kind of thing. He was an athlete. He was a biochemist. He did computer science. He did statistics, and one of those people who just can do all those things. And he's now a coach as well. And he just really, we got together and saw this explosion of data coming. This was when Bluetooth was brand new and Wi-Fi was brand new. Wearable technology was just sort of hitting the market back around the early 2000s, and we just thought there was going to be this major explosion of data in our industry. So we thought we better get involved in that.
What's the goal of this particular summit? What are you looking to achieve?
Oh, look, for us, it's really about just getting together and sharing and really pushing our industry forward. Our industry is still, as I said, pretty young. So it's really about just getting everyone to share what they do. Obviously, what we do with all of our clients is confidential, so we can't sort of share that. So we love to get them together and have them, share with each other and sort of explain what they're doing and just give ideas. And I think it just pushes the whole industry forward, which is really important. That's obviously good for business for us and for all of the other sports technology companies to push that forward and just drive knowledge and just to celebrate. We just like to get everyone together and have a good social as well. It's lots of fun and just catch up with everyone.
Dr. Markus Deutsch is the CEO and co-founder of Fusion Sport. Thank you, Dr. Deutsch.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
That will do it for us this week. Remember, the future is now. This is the Future Sport Podcast. I'm Bram Weinstein. The Future Sport Podcast is brought to you by 3Advance, developers of sports tech apps that are AI-powered and UX-focused. So if you're looking to create some apps for your startup or your sports biz calls for some artificial or business intelligence, you should check out 3Advance. They're incredible. Go to 3advance.com. That's the number 3advance.com.